To consider the untapped capabilities of the human mind, the nature of non-human intelligence, and how it all fits in the broader unfolding of consciousness and evolution, this is Neon Galactic, a podcast produced by PBS affiliate KeyTV in Northern California. I'm James Falk. Thanks for joining us, and please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this channel. We're doing things here that others just aren't. I'm joined today by retired philosophy professor Michael Zimmerman from the University of Colorado at Boulder, who will help me navigate an important interview with a man who has been at the center of the NHI conversation for decades, author and experiencer Whitley Strieber. Already the author of a watershed memoir around alien engagement, Communion, as well as many other books, both fiction and non, Strieber has recently published an astonishing new addition to his work, The Fourth Mind. Like many of his books, this volume explores the frontiers of NHI engagement and does it with a subtlety and depth unmatched in the field. The Fourth Mind takes on the visitors, their physical makeup and apparent spirituality, as well as what Strieber posits may be humanity's lost inheritance of psi siddhis and expanded consciousness. Together with his last book, Them, Strieber has over the past several years begun to unravel the deep mystery and ontological confusion surrounding apparent NHI contact. Through that process, he has helped us all ground our conceits in the complex drama of lived human experience, while also enabling a responsible and informed kind of necessary conjecture. We find ourselves having to imagine our way toward deeper truths. Strieber never claims to have the final answers. Instead, his work offers insight and experience that can help us all more effectively engage with fundamental questions at this pivotal and potentially treacherous point in our shared human history. Much, perhaps everything, depends on figuring this out. What your interest and experience is around the topic?
First, thank you, James, for having me back on the show. And first, really to say thank you, Whitley, for all the work you've done. I've read many of your books, including the last four, uh, Supernatural, the Them, of course, the most recent one, the Fourth Mind. There was another one I'm dropping out. But I've always admired your level-headedness and your desire to try out various hypotheses, not just ending up with something and driving it like it was the absolute truth. I think this is you're being light on your feet all this time, and I think it's very helpful. You've come down more to a increasingly defined view about all this in this last book. Very admirable. I was impressed by all of it. I will say, like many people have told you, seeing the face on the first cover, on the communion cover, the first version of this, right, with the black eyes, was so startling because it was like the shock of recognition. I had never had that reaction to any kind of picture or painting or photograph in my entire life. That told me something. And then years later, recently, really, I've been looking and talking to my siblings, and it looks like there's abductions in our family. Go figure, right? So here we are, and glad to be on the show with you, Whitley.
Well, thank you both. I'm looking forward to it, and we have a we're at a remarkable place in human history. A major turning point has appeared, but not so. It's not yet in focus. That means it's time for conjecture, exploration, the use of reason and imagination, and not time to draw conclusions.
Mhm.
I love this kind of thing. This is my wheelhouse.
Mhm. Well, we're absolutely thrilled to have you on the show. Let's start with something basic about the book. We're here to talk about the book. So, what would you describe as your mission in taking on this particular volume, and how do you rate your level of success having finished it?
Well, the fourth mind is a an effort to demythologize
Mhm.
one particular part of our visitors, and also to uh, explain what the differences are between our capabilities and theirs, and how to conjecture about why we apparently lost these capabilities. Because at one point, at a moment in Brahenia in Brazil, when one of them was dying and exposed to medical personnel, it said that they were saddened because we had lost abilities that they still possess. And I thought to myself when I read that, that's probably the most important statement they have ever made.
Mm.
And that is where the book began. Then I found a document, or rather, someone sent me a document. I have no idea who. I get 200 or 300 emails a day, and I have no idea. In any case, I wound up reading this biologist's statement on Reddit. And the second I read the first line of it, I realized it had to be true because the first couple of lines of it discuss something that I have seen but never discussed or publicized in any way. I told Bud Hopkins about it, and he was so disgusted that I decided, he said, that's just your crazy imagination. And I thought, oh, well, okay, maybe that's true because you can't really tell with these things when you're observing something in this context, you can't tell where your imagination starts and your observation ends.
Mm.
The reasons for this have to do with the way memory works. Memory is mostly comparing input to known and accepted uh, material that's in the brain. And when you're at a point where there's nothing for the input to be connected to, you're in trouble already with the memory. I know that, so I'm very careful. However, this is so uniquely, so profoundly different from anything we know on Earth. As soon as I saw it written down there, I realized, my goodness, I was right. That's an accurate observation. And then as I read more into the document, I realized that I've seen these people a lot in my life. I mean, by comparison with most people, I mean, I've had probably at least a couple of hours of pretty clear visual exchange with them over the past 30 years, in mostly in 15 or 20-second or maybe as much as a minute of interaction. But not, in other words, they're very elusive, but you build up all of that and you do have a picture. So I was able to also, at one point, they actually showed me their bodies in great detail, which I mentioned in the book Communion. In any case, I realized I could use the document, and I knew what had been said at Varhinia, and I thought to myself, this is the core of the next thing I have to do. And that's how it started.
You venture, that's your starting point, and you venture in some remarkable directions, which I think are absolutely fascinating. And I have a lot of questions about where you ultimately end up. But how did you figure that you could trust the document from Reddit? It sort of it doubled down on a lot of observations like you'd had, like you mentioned in your own experience, that sort of they serve to kind of confirm each other. Were there any discrepancies that you noticed between what you knew or what you had experienced and what was in that Reddit document?
That's the interesting part. I don't recall any.
Mm.
And from the beginning, the first one was the way they evacuate. And I've seen them do this. It comes out through their skin, and through pores, and they have a kind of a sheath that they wear, which may be part of their biology. I don't know. But when they don't wear that, they're very pale, and this material will be oozing out of their skin. It's just utterly disgusting. That's what made Bud so disgusted. And it smells like ammonia.
Mm.
And when I read all of that, I thought, he can't have picked this up from me because I didn't say anything about it to Bud, and Bud just tossed it off, and he's never written about it either. So that was very confirming because that's so unique. It's not like anything on Earth
No one's going
evacuates.
to make that up randomly, or
It
yeah.
wasn't made up randomly. It's a real observation.
Hmm.
And then I went through it very carefully, step by step, and I don't really recall anything that stood out that was different in a radical way from what I have seen and experienced. Nothing.
Hmm.
The document is extremely accurate, in my opinion, in insofar as it fits my own observations.
And there were some remarkable things in that document about consciousness, which you also get to in the book, which
Yeah.
that's part of the subject that gets me the most excited. Michael, I don't mean to bulldoze, so if there's anything that you want to ask, feel free to jump in with questions or comments or anything. Um, but yeah, the consciousness stuff really, really struck me. Basically, that, and then it talked about like forming the soul, feeding our experiences into sort of like a collective soul, and then that ultimately, becoming the apotheosis that arises there, ultimately, and that's what you say the visitors are most after. That's the
Yes.
thing they most desire. I understand that it's kind of mysterious what they mean by apotheosis, but where do you stand right now in terms of what they're after with that?
Well, the one thing about the document that gave me a bit of pause was the similarity between the description of the spirituality of the visitors and Teilhard de Chardin in particular's idea of the noosphere. And it could simply be that Teilhard is in agreement with them. But I thought to myself, uh, what if this part of the document is an invention of the author, not necessarily a conscious invention, but he may have read Teilhard and he may be imputing things to them that basically come from a human philosopher. I'm not sure about that, but the sense of a collective consciousness is very strong in them.
Hmm.
They have a they have some of them, not all, have personalities, complex personalities, but they are also united telepathically, and that is quite real. I live with it all the time with them, uh, and uh, so they have essentially one mind, but many bodies. And they're non-vocal as well. They can't speak. They don't have a syrinx to make a sound like a bird, and they don't have vocal cords. So when you hear these people I have a very great, not disdain for, but suspicion of the people who have come out from the government because a lot of what they say can't be true. And one of them has begun saying that they have a language. They do not have a language like we do. They have written they have a written language. It's hieroglyphic and representational in nature. I don't understand it, but they use it with me all the time because their attitude is that I actually do understand it at a level of my mind I'm not directly in touch with. So they will hang these hieroglyphic strips up in front of me in the night, and they're these glowing hieroglyphic strips. And I look at them and I think, well, okay, what's that? And then, it disappears and we move on. And I guess it has some relevance, but I don't know. In any case, uh, the the spiritual part of the document is probably the weakest part
Hmm.
and the part I'm most uh, uneasy with.
Okay.
Uh, so that's kind of where I stand with that.
Right. Could I say something about that? Uh, as I understand it, you argue that they're quadruple hemisphere brain has allowed them to stand outside the domain of time in some
Yeah.
way, just as a fisherman can see the past, present, and future of a trout in the stream and see what's ahead in a way that trout cannot. So they may be able to do that on their own for us. And that one of the things that happens in the mind lock that they're able to achieve by the gaze, they have this extraordinary gaze, that they can experience us in a way, I think, analogous to how we experience animals. I had a wonderful dog for 10 years named Boudin. That's a Cajun name for a Cajun sausage. And we loved each other. We went everywhere. And there were times when, he was, licking me and wagging and so on and looking at me with his eyes. And it was as if he wanted to say something, as if he wanted to communicate more than with the wags and with the licking and all this stuff. And I had a certain appreciation of him because he was so short-lived. He only lived to be 11 or something. And so I could see his past, present, and future unfolding in a way that was not even available to him, since it seems like humans are acutely aware of their mortality and perhaps in a way more dramatic than most animals. There may be exceptions to that. So maybe they look at us with a kind of compassion in some way. But what they also see in us, as Whitley is suggesting in the book, is our capacity for spontaneity, the fact that the future is unknown, more or less. I mean, there's some things we can predict, but you never know what's right around the corner. How you meet your wife or husband, where you get your new position in some way. It's just a happenstance that was unpredictable. And what Whitley seems to be suggesting, if please correct me, is that they don't have this any longer. Maybe they did at one time, but perhaps they've evolved in a way that it's gone from them, and they look to us. It's not just a DNA they want to refresh, as it were, but their own experience, and that they are both terrified of us because of the wildness of our emotions at times, but also envious in some way of its spontaneity. And one of the things, now this is perhaps getting to the issue where the spiritual issue. You could argue that in many traditions, there is a combination of the experience of eternity, which itself evokes a kind of spontaneity which is unknown to the egoic mind in many cases, which is after childhood starts to freeze up and starts to be defensive and frightened. So becoming again as a little child, as Jesus said, and Buddha said this in effect too, it would be the goal. But how could you simultaneously be the gain this kind of sense of eternity while simultaneously preserving the freshness of youth? This seems to be the ideal, the goal that I think Whitley, reading your book, you yourself seem to be attracted to. It's something that attracts me as well. And whether this is what they're after or up to, it's unclear. This is your speculation, hypothesis, as a way of trying to approach them. And if the promise of this is that the two forms, the human and the visitors, can somehow engage, achieve a kind of communion, to go back to your first book on this, this would be beneficial to both of us. And that's our historic opportunity, as you're suggesting. Does this sound, is this more or less?
Yeah, it's very close. I think what happened to them is that they ended up trapped outside of the stream of time. And it turned out to be a trap. And, every conscious being facing a limited lifespan wants to know the future. We do too, both as individuals and as cultures and as a species. We want to know the future, what the future holds, so that we can navigate more effectively. However, it's possible, I think, to leave the four dimensions of reality that we understand, the first three dimensions, and then, of course, the fourth dimension is time. And when you're outside of the stream of time and you do know the future and the past, you end up in a situation where you are unable to taste the new. You lose it. You lose contact with the new. And they at 3 o'clock, about 3 o'clock, the time varies for certain reasons. Every morning, I will get up and go into a state of where I take my attention away from my mind and open my mind. And they will come in. Their approach is normally very hesitantly physical, and then it evolves into this kind of a thing. And they really, really like this. And if I don't get there, they woke me up in various ways to do this for years. Back in the 90s, they woke me up to do it, and I didn't understand what was going on. Uh, the and then we left the cabin and lived another life, and I didn't do it at 3 o'clock in the morning for a long time. Then Annie passed away, and immediately it began again, waking me up at that hour. They would blow in my face, pinch me, twinkle my nose, give me a little dry kiss, all invisibly. I never saw anything doing this. And it reached the point that they would, and this I did get a video of, they pushed an invisible presence pushed the telephone, my cell phone, off of the table beside the bed in order to make a noise and wake me up. Another time, and I also got this on video, the little air conditioner in the room mysteriously turned itself on in the middle of the night in order to wake me up. They want this badly. They want it badly. And they enter, and I have a feeling the way they're constructed, they all enter, not just one or two or three, but the entire consciousness, and shares with me. And it has also been really helpful with the books because I do interact with them in this state, and they have very good ideas. So it can be helpful. It's not channeling at all or downloads or any of that. I'm very much my own person in this relationship. But one of them years ago, I used to walk in the woods in the night outside near the cabin, went quite often deep into the woods because to show them I was available. And it was quite scary, of course. I mean, because yes, I was available. And no, I did not want to be lifted up aboard a UFO again and have that experience repeated. But nevertheless, one of them was present, and I could not see him exactly, but he was just on the side of the path and in some bushes. And I could tell he was really old. He was a very old one. And they do age. I mean, they're definitely just like us in that respect. And so I sat down there was a log nearby. It was almost as if he'd chosen the place so that I could have a place to sit, not have to just stand. I went into the state of taking my attention out of my head and placing it on my body so that my mind was more open. And I asked him, I thought to myself, I can question him now. So I asked him, what does the universe, this was intended to be the first question in a dialogue, but the answer was so shocking, turned out to be the only one. What does the universe mean to you? And they would generally respond to me in images in those days. It's much more complex now. But in those days, they would respond in images. And a vivid image of a coffin came into my mind. And it was shocking. Shocked me to my core. And I thought, here they are, so advanced, so knowledgeable. And this is where they've ended up.
Mm.
See this as a coffin.
Mm.
And another time, and my memory of this is one of those memories that I'm not sure of. It feels both like a memory and an imagined experience. But then again, so did the seeing of them evacuating themselves, which turned out to be corroborated by the Reddit document. So I'll repeat this, but with the caveat that this is, I'm pretty sure I was sort of brought into their experience for about half a minute one time. And it was like riding on rails. I knew everything that would happen. I wasn't, I had no sense of freedom of action at all. Everything, it was like being in a protracted state of deja vu. It was
Mm.
horrible, appalling. It's a kind of hell, really.
Mm.
And I think they're here for basically what TBH Kuiper and Mark Morris offered as an opinion in the magazine Science in April of 1977. They're here for the new. And uh, Morris and Kuiper thought of it as new ideas and and explained that they would always hide from us because if they didn't, we would redirect our entire attention toward them and our culture would lose its innovative edge, which is quite true. It's called cultural colonization, and all of us uh, Eurocentrics can look back on what we did to the rest of the world and understand what that means. In any case, uh, this experience of being outside of the time stream was horrendous. It was like life had ended, like I was dead and alive at the same time.
Mm.
Experience had no impact. And it kind of begs the question of is this a kind of block universe and awareness is moving through it like a like a kind of wave and everything is known, but we our reactions to this experience are what's giving us the energy of giving energy to our souls and making our lives worth living. And if we move above the wave and see ahead too far, we lose our our sense of we have no further sense of discovery. They're in that state, I'm quite sure. And that's why when they enter us and have communion with us, which my wife back there understood from the beginning,
Mm.
they aren't trapped outside of time anymore. They want to re-enter the time stream and to do it through us, through sharing our bodies, basically. They've said to me more than once when I've reacted badly to the idea of having a co-conspirator inside my body, that bodies are community property. And, uh, so I do that. I let them in. I let them in every night
Mm.
without.
It's interesting to me. One of the things that I've sensed in your book that is sort of had a bright neon sign on it about convergence. I've seen this idea pop up in various different forms from various different folks. But you talk about the strange electricity, and you where there may be this energy that is actually the conscious agent behind what the grays are doing, and that maybe the individual grays are like scuba suits, allowing this overall overarching intelligence to manifest in a physical form in order to perform various tasks or interact or do things that need doing. There has been more and more recently, there's been a lot of discussion about plasma being potentially capable of forming the structures necessary to manifest an intelligence of its own. It can store data and it can form walls and structures and host currents. And there's a book that came out by Robert Temple called A New Science of Heaven, where he talks about all the all the things that would need to happen in order for that to be true. And it is quite possible that that complexity could form. And considering that the universe is 95% plasma, if consciousness, can be in a plasma form, we could be surrounded on all sides by, conscious entities that we're totally unaware of, and they could be manifesting in our sky as the orbs people see. Um, it's a astonishing thought, and it also, hints at the fact that maybe the Earth could be conscious because it has a plasma shell, or the sun could potentially be something conscious, and it could sort of fit in with the archetypal notions of the zodiac and how they interact with their sorts of intelligence. Um, and then that also couples with some of the things that Tom DeLonge and some other folks have been talking about, where there is very much a hive mind kind of thing going on with the other, and that's something that comes up again and again. Um, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, you mentioned electricity, and you talk about Tummo, I think it is, and then also um, the spine. I forget the name of it. I should know it.
Kundalini.
Kundalini, yeah, sorry, that's I should know that. But yeah, like this electric charge that runs up people's neck and can lead to spiritual epiphanies. I find that whole idea wickedly fascinating, and it makes sense to me that all of this would be way more pervasive than we're aware because we're such isolated physical beings on a little rock. But what are your thoughts?
Okay, well, first it's an aside, and I would like to just say that this phrase hive mind comes out of the military, and the military's response to this is not adequate. Uh, it is not a hive mind. It is a very complex, richly nuanced consciousness,
Yeah.
Mhm.
which projects into many different personalities that are contained in the brains of the visitors.
Mhm.
It is not some kind of beehive like robotic,
Mhm.
which is that's the implication of that term.
Connotation. Yeah, yeah. Okay.
And I'm sorry, it's
No,
a
I respect that.
no, no, I know you do. But it is part of the failure of the insiders to understand what they're doing. They don't know what they're doing at all. Now that I've seen the commentaries of people like Lou Elizondo, David Grush, Jake Barber, and others, it's clear that their response to this has been um, anorexic almost
Mhm.
compared to what could be.
Yeah.
Now, um, what was the next part of the question was very complex, and I would like you to see if you could look at it again and come to the center of it because I'm not quite sure how to respond.
Just, I mean, the idea that that there may be a strata of consciousness that is sort of electric in nature, that is
Okay,
way
all
more
right.
pervasive, and may have something to do with like what we consider our spirit, also,
Yeah.
and just your thoughts on all that.
And then there was also the issue of Kundalini, which is a separate, not a totally separate issue, but it's related. But there's a two
Yeah,
different questions. That's what I was trying to get at.
that
Okay.
was a lot, so I apologize for
No, no,
that.
that's it was a bit stacked up.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
the best way I can address the first one is from an experience that occurred in 1995 or 96 when we still had the cabin. And it, in that summer, I used to have a meditation room. In fact, I know them. I'm going to have lunch, oddly enough, today with the owner of the cabin, who's become a close friend. And I am able to go there again from time to time. And I still, as soon as I go there, experiences happen. And just as they don't ever with other people, but when I'm there, they do. Um, and uh, so, and I mean by that physical experiences. So, in any case, we didn't know it at the time, but we would lose the cabin in about 3 months. And all of a sudden, one night when I was in the meditation room, came 7 thuds on the ceiling, which was a surprise because normally what I was experiencing was not very physical at that point. It had been earlier, but not at that point. And then I felt a presence in the room, and it was so palpable that I actually couldn't concentrate. And so I said, "Listen, I know you're here, but you're too close. It's too physical and not physical enough at the same time. I can't meditate in here like this. I'm going to have to see what you look like." And so nothing happened. And I said, "Okay, I'm going to bed." I went to bed. Uh, at about 3 in the morning, there came a tap on my shoulder. Very familiar at that time. That was where the way the Grays would wake me up. So I was awake instantly, of course. But it wasn't a Gray that I saw in the room. Sitting at the foot of the bed was a man, just as just as real as you guys are. In fact, more real because he was not in Zoom. He was in the room,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
so I thought, "Good God!" And I got got up and leaned forward. Anne was still asleep. I thought to myself, "I'm going to wake Anne up, and she's going to see this." But then I thought, if I do that and it disappears, then I don't get to interact with this, whatever it is. And so I slid down to the foot of the bed, thinking, is once I'm convinced that this is a person, I'm going to wake Ann up and we're going to both talk to this person. Because this was no ordinary experience. This was not an intruder. In other words, it was a man in what looked like a, a tunic from the ancient world. And I looked at him. I got very close to him. I was just a few feet, maybe a foot and a half, 2 feet away from his face, looking directly at him, and he was looking at me. And I thought, the guy is totally real. And his hands were in his lap. And I reached out and took his hand and held it up, and I could feel it was a hand. It was smaller than mine. It was a smaller man than I am. And so I smelled his skin, and we bathe. It turns out that whoever that was, they don't. And he was really ripe. And it shocked me. And I sort of dropped his hand. And he then made a little movement and just disappeared. And I thought he showed me what he looked like. He did what I asked. So I went in. That was the first time I did a 3 o'clock meditation. I went in and meditated, and it's 3 o'clock. And then at 11, they would come banging down onto the ceiling, and we would see orbs. Not, I didn't ever see them, but a lot of the kids would see these orbs floating around in the woods. And it became obvious that a big part of this is a human thing. And when you talked about orbs, I thought to myself, I want to discuss or bring in the idea of the human level of this, because I think that many of the orbs are souls. Because the last night at the cabin, oh, and and you could hear the banging coming down on the ceiling all through the house. It was loud. Anne said one day, "Well, I'm going to do it. I'm coming up and I'm going to meditate with you." And she came into the room, and the banging started. The 7 bangs. We used to joke that it was the 7 dwarfs, but they were actually big because they made so much noise. And so she's saying, "Actually, I'm not ready for this," and she got the hell out of that room pronto. But I was used to it then, and I've had it probably all my life, so I stayed, of course. The last night at the cabin, we've lost it. We're leaving the next morning for the last time. I sit in the room, they come, the bangs. I say, this is it. I will never be back here again. And and I could feel that there was movement, that it was discomfort. You understand, whatever's there is physical and it's heavy, but it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be the individual sitting on the foot of the bed. It can turn into something we can't see and also something else we can. So I waited and did the meditation. I went back to bed. I lay down in bed, and suddenly there was a glow in the front yard. The room, the meditation room and the bedroom both looked out over the front yard. And I thought, my God, what the is the house on fire? Because I thought, oh, that actually could be a good thing because maybe we could save it with the insurance money. But uh, I went to the window and this extraordinarily beautiful orb came floating out from the meditation room and hovered over the lawn. And it had rays coming out of it that were thin like lasers. They looked like lasers. And when they would touch me, I could feel it. They would like as it moved toward me, it kind of they would prick me. They would come into me these things, and I could feel the essence of another human being touching me in a way that we are never touched. And it was an absolutely peak, beautiful experience. That's orbs in my life.
Yeah.
I know that there are people who can call in orbs, and there's unfortunately something happening in the world where a man who's very religious calls in orbs, and the CIA and the Air Force are very keen on him because he is so religious, and they're very religious, and they want to look at this as a religious experience, which would, of course, be a disaster. And it's not the Blessed Virgin Mary, et cetera, and so forth. It's something much closer to our true humanity than the gods we have created in the past, confabulated in the past. Um, so let's now shift to Kundalini.
Yeah.
In the second part of the book, I discuss what seems to have happened to us to cause us to lose our abilities of levitation, uh, telepathy, and other abilities, self-healing, all kinds of abilities we don't have anymore, but they exist still in memory in the form of the siddhis of the Hindu tradition and in other traditions as well. In the Middle Ages, people could levitate. And there's a wonderful book about this that never advocates for levitation being real, but just describes one case after another of religious hysterics, basically, in the Middle Ages who could levitate. And the reason they had these powers was that they were completely leaving the ego behind and becoming in this ecstatic state. It was transformative, and they would levitate. Um, the Back 12,000 years ago, the physical debris from a supernova the radiation from it had reached Earth 30,000 years ago, and the signature it left was a strip of uh, uh, the planet from Southeast Asia through Australia, where a lot of the large ungulates, which lived all outdoors at all times, died out because they were sheeted with gamma rays when this happened, and probably lasted 2 or 3 days. And the rest of it would have been primarily over the oceans. So that was where we have the land animals. Now, 11 or 12,000 years ago, the physical debris from the same supernova reached the solar system, causing mayhem that lasted 1,000 years. This is when all of our stories of the gods having a war in space come from. It is when the stories of great floods come, those flood stories come from there. And the second part of it, known as the Younger Dryas, involved at one point the collapse of the glaciers. Well, the abrupt collapse, they had been melting previously, but they abruptly collapsed midway through the Younger Dryas, and ocean levels rose 400 feet in a matter probably of days or weeks at most, inundating substantial parts of the planet. We know that the human population declined very dramatically during the Younger Dryas. We can't be sure of how dramatically, because obviously the ability to we don't, the fossils are very rare. But other animals, the whole North American continent was first destroyed by a gigantic conflagration, if you can believe it, from the Rockies to the Appalachians and into New England. The whole continent burned, leaving behind something that in geology is called the black mat, which is a mat of ash and charcoal ash and the skeletons of plankton. And why would the skeletons of plankton be there? The sequence of events was this. First, there were meteorites and little bolides that came sheeting into the atmosphere. You find mammoths, the carcasses of mammoths that often will have tiny bits of iron embedded in their bone. They literally, when this happened, they literally were killed and dropped to the ground. That's why you find some of them still with food in their mouths, because they died that abruptly. It also set the entire forest. The whole North American continent was heavily forested up to the glacier line. It set all of that on fire. And then you had hundreds of years on the planet where there was no sunlight getting through, and everything became incredibly cold. But when that ended, the glaciers melted. That's why the plankton was there, because the continent was flooded for nearly 1,000 years. During all of this, the people who lived on this continent, for the most part, everyone east of the Rockies, the Clovis people, were wiped out, at least 30,000 individuals. The planet was not heavily populated at the time. The Pacific Coast Indians still have legends of this event, and they were not wiped out. That's when the glaciers collapsed and came roaring down the Mississippi Valley. The sea levels rose by 400 feet, and any human populations that were living near the sea, and if you look at population densities right now, guess where we live to this day? Near the sea. They were wiped out in a day or a week. We were left isolates. The people who had lived in the uplands, who were probably detached from this, whatever was there. And I'm not talking about some grand Atlantis or anything like that. I'm talking about a very different type of civilization. They were telepathic almost certainly, and I show in my book why that's probably true. And they had capabilities of moving things physically that we don't have anymore without any pulleys or anything. One man did rediscover those capabilities, called Edlid Skalnin, a Lithuanian immigrant in Florida, who had created something called the coral castle. And he moved heavy pieces of coral from his quarry to the place where he created the Coral Castle without any pulleys, any devices at all. And he said it was an ancient Egyptian skill that he had learned,
And it's by
presumably
himself too. He did all the work by himself, right? Like,
himself. Absolutely, no one
yeah.
ever saw him move a thing, anything, and people would look for it, of course, and they never succeeded in seeing him because he was probably also telepathic. Well, he never said that, and he only moved things when he knew people weren't watching. That would have been easy if he was also telepathic, which I assume he was. So maybe he was a throwback to an earlier kind of human being. The point is that the medieval levitators and Ed are indications that we still have these powers latent within us. And now there's the telepathy tapes of Kai Dickens and Diane Hennessy Powell. And I had I've had them both on my show Dreamland. And while uh, Kai was on, we had a telepathic exchange with one of the spellers who was interested in the show, even though the show was being recorded. This individual was nowhere near any way, had no way of knowing what we were talking about. So that's real as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, I do telepathy with the visitors so routinely, it's just part of my life. I don't even think about it anymore.
Yeah.
And
So
and
did
I
this person managed to pipe in, like somehow to you?
yeah, what happened was Kai
Wow.
texted him because with a question, and he proceeds to text back stuff about what we're talking about on the show that she hadn't texted him about. That's what happened. It was quite remarkable. So, we, in any case, we lost all of this. We lost our connection with one another because the population was decimated and the people living in the highlands were suddenly alone in the world. And that's when farming began because we didn't have any the food sources were gone. The hunter-gatherer world ended very abruptly, and we were desperate for food. We learned to farm, but it also isolated us in ourselves. It was a every person for themselves situation. Survival was all we had left, and we lost our community and built egos. That's where the ego was born. And there's nothing wrong with the ego, but we need to recover our community, our community mind, and forget the military and their stupid hive mind thing. I know communal mind because I live in a communal mind from time to time. It's the most precious time of my life when the Greys open their very quiet, beautifully elegant, complex, richly observant mind to me. We can have that too as human beings. And that's a big part of the message of the book. And that's a long answer to your very long and complex question.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for that. It was beautifully done. But that brings me up to the probably the most important point of the book, I thought, which was that we may be entering an even younger Dryas, right? Like so young it hasn't quite happened yet with climate change and everything else. And we're encountering this as we're perhaps beginning to rediscover some of these nascent abilities. And it's almost like a race. Are we going to realize who and what we are and what we can do outside of technology and outside of, commercial materialism? Or are we going to consume ourselves to death and destroy the planet that we live on? My question to you is, as human beings, what can we do to begin that process of recovery in order to transcend this moment? And once again, like, I mean, you even mentioned potentially healing the planet with some of these recovered abilities. I mean, like that may be a possibility. How can we engage with that again?
Well, a lot of it involves our relationship with the Greys. And there are others here too, but the Greys are the ones who are going to be forward with us because they're the only ones that are tough enough to deal with us.
Okay.
And there are others here that are, I've met some of them, they're extremely gentle and they're not like the Greys. And so we got the Greys that they're going to be, And their attitude is, I'm sure, they're going to either be midwives or undertakers, and they don't really care which, because they'll get something out of it no matter what. They'll either get a harvest of souls or they'll get the communion experience, one of the two. So that's what they're here for. And I don't think they really care one way or another. They're not going to be the cavalry coming in to save us. In fact, the only indications I've gotten from them about how they will react if we do lose the planet is that they will emerge, but we won't like what that is. We won't like it at all. And it's going to be an unpleasant experience for us.
Hmm.
And and right now, I mean, the United States, which is the world's largest polluter and also the only country outside of Europe with the capability of really altering its uh, carbon dioxide output. The Chinese can't do it because it's too corrupt. If you look at the Chinese, uh, look at China on paper, they're doing a wonderful job of it. But if you look at the actual carbon output, it's rising. That means that the paper is just that. It's paper. That's not true. Russia is on its back. It can't do anything one way or another. Europe's doing as good a job as it possibly can for the most part. The rest of the world, A, is not much of a polluter, and B, can't do anything anyway. India is a significant polluter and it's helpless. If you go to India, you'll find out what I mean. There's no way they're going to do anything. It's a it's a community of hand-to-mouth livers, most of them using wood when they can find it to to cook and heat with. And they're not gonna be able to change anything. The United States, in its wisdom, has decided that we won't change anything either. We've elected a president whose attitude is this doesn't exist. Not only are we not concerned about climate change, it doesn't even exist. And they are now methodically going through the EPA, NOAA, and all of these different agencies and undoing everything they were doing to help this planet. Therefore, the conclusion is clear. The planet will fail. It's going to fail very soon, in fact. Probably the visitor said to me 3 years ago uh, that we had about 7 years left before every human being on the planet knew the planet was doomed. And that gives us 4 years now. So it seems like the Trump administration is going to go out with quite a bang. And that's where we are. That's what we have to face. Now, can we respond in the way you suggest? I hope so, because there's no other way. The only way we can succeed in this, and this is the core message of the fourth mind, is by waking up these latent powers and above all, building a community of mind. And the spellers of Kai Dickens and Diane Powell show us the way. It's not brute force at all. It is it is living a life of kindness and openness and not being afraid to expose your own sins to others. And there are very quietly building human telepathic communities. And I will tell you this, everybody is a sinner. And my wife, who was a super conscious being, used to say that awakening begins with laughter. And that's exactly where the new world will begin, when we can laugh at ourselves and be calm within ourselves about who and what we are. And we will become kind to ourselves and others. And our telepathic abilities will open up from there. And from that, we may be able to begin to save ourselves. Maybe. It's a big maybe, though.
Big maybe. Well, could I just first of all, this whole thing about we're all sinners. I remember a priest not too long ago saying, don't be getting down on people whose sins are different from yours.
Yeah, exactly. Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah,
I've never forgotten that.
yeah, we got
Like,
to, Anne used to say, uh, we were in the Gurdjieff Foundation.
mhm,
She would not do it much because she would say, they can't laugh. They're
mhm,
also scared of not looking awake, that they're sleeping and awake at the same time.
mhm,
I mean, they're sleeping their wakefulness. That's not exactly what she said. Oh yeah, they're sleep waking. In other words,
sleep.
pretending to be awake. And
Mhm.
they're all interested in how do I look to others? And she said, if you can't laugh, you can't wake up. You can't know yourself. Self-knowledge starts with the ability to laugh at yourself.
Mhm.
I I was a city editor for the local newspaper, and I had a knee surgery, got hooked on pain pills, ended up on heroin, got arrested, thrown in jail. My whole life collapsed, and all of my secrets were splashed across the very front page of the newspaper where I was working. And that was the moment that my life started to get way better. It's
Mhm.
like having all of that stuff that I'd been hiding and shame thrown out for everyone to see, and for me to finally have to confront all of that and to learn that shame was not the cross that I thought it would be, allowed me to reinvent myself and, gave me strength to face other difficulties that I'd always been afraid of. So I think that people are always so busy trying to hide the crime that they don't
Yeah,
realize that, you
Mhm.
know, that that's
we've
the way to
all
freedom.
and we all have stuff to hide, and that's okay. Because I mean, I've known people who have done much worse than that. I mean, I grew up in Texas politics when I was a boy, and I've seen some ugly things.
Yeah.
But that's being human, and it's okay to be human. I mean, I know the Grays they've done terrible things. They won't even, I was face to face with some of them one time, I said, I know you have a very hard history. I can see it in your faces. You learn if you're with them enough that their faces seem expressionless at first, but they're not. And no one would do anything. They just were there. They didn't. They have been around the block too. That's another reason they are going to be our midwives because they're not innocent either.
Well, let me say something here because there's two things facing us. One is, and I was one of the first environmental philosophers in the 1970s. That's how I started out. I was really writing about environmental philosophy and modern technology. So we have this double thing happening. One is environmental apocalypse in one way or the other. It's dicey. It's a bad scene. But the other is at the same time, and also part of the generating of that apocalypse is this quest for AI and AGI. And so there's a lot of talk about downloads that occur. A lot of people say that they've experienced downloads of mathematics and computer knowledge and so on, as if as if the others, the visitors, whoever, are seeding us with that. But what would this produce? Uh, uh, there's a certain drive on the part of certainly in the West. I don't know how much this is characteristic of other societies, but the last 2,500 years of Western civilization have been largely focused on increasing our power, uh,
Yeah,
and and that the what you can see this also in the Christian tradition in the form of the idea of uh, becoming God. This is the teaching of when Jesus says, you are my brothers and sisters. Now this increasingly becomes taken to the meaning that we can do that through human history. This is the point of Hegel. Hegel says that basically what happens in human history is that with Jesus Christ, God empties himself completely into human history. Basically, there's no leftover. So that the worship of Jesus Christ is the worship of God incarnate. And that this can be taken, this is how Hegel takes it. Human history is the process whereby which human beings elevate themselves to the status of God. This is Marxism. Now, he understands this not as heightened absolute consciousness, but rather material control of the planet Earth and the maximization of human well-being and power and capitalism, you could say, as another version of that. So the whole Cold War between Russia and America was a war between a collectivist versus individualist version of this quest for power. This was Heidegger's analysis of modernity, the 20th century, and so on. So we have this quest for AI as if we're about to hand off intelligence to non-human beings, to computers, to these algorithms in some way, as if is this is what's going to happen as the our species goes down as a result of the way in which we've been treating the biosphere as our private resource, and will these non-human beings take it from there? Now, the reason I resist this, although I can see why, this is, by the way, that is the essence of Silicon Valley. These people don't care about the money. Yeah, they like the money, but only because it helps enhance their power. And the power is to create God, super intelligence. Now, the reason I resist is because I want to be a human being. We are mortals.
Shame on you.
But being
Okay.
mortal is this is our destiny in some way. This is how we've turned out. And the Greys have discovered what it's like to be immortal in a way that doesn't work.
That's well
Whitley
said.
has to go.
I have run out of time, however, and all I can say is that your last sentence is absolutely right on the money. I think that's exactly what's happened to them.
Mhm.
And it is why they want us to survive so badly.
Yeah.
And being the way they are, they're going to be extremely angry if we don't survive at us, at our souls. And so we definitely do want to survive. And, you don't want, I've had them angry at me plenty of times, and it's not pleasant.
And
So.
what are the ramifications if they're mad at our souls? I mean, that just sounds permanent and drastic.
Yes, I mean, yeah, if we end up in a situation where we can't make bodies and we can't do this, then maybe we're going to repeat their history because their bodies are biomechanical constructions. Did this happen to them and they ended up in order to still have some kind of relationship with the physical world and experience some level of change? Did they build these things in order
Mhm.
to project themselves into the world, and the bodies look the way they do because this is
Mhm.
fits them, fits their souls? I don't know. But we're talking now at levels of where everything must be speculative because uh, we in our culture, in the Western culture, we've given up the science of the soul a long time ago. It probably was existed one time, but not in recorded history, not except at the very beginning, perhaps. Um, I think that the Pyramid of Unas, the description of the methodology the pharaoh should use to ascend, is probably the last. It's believed to be the first religious document. I think it's actually the last
Mhm.
expression of a consistent science of the soul. Without that, we will wander.
Mhm.
Um, now I have to leave. I've got another meeting
Yeah.
in 2 minutes.
Well, thank you so much, Whitley, and thank you, Michael. That was a brilliant point you made at the end and brought it back full circle.
It
Um,
certainly, and thank you both for having me.
yeah, thank you.